Are you not entertained? Well, you sure as hell were if you sat through last week's town council meeting. And that's not the only thing that took place while I was gone. Yes, it was something of a long hiatus, and a lot of things took place. So we're just going to kind of rush through what's, at this point, something of old news. Yes, the masks finally came off. And it was a wonderful moment. Amazing to see the New Milford Board of Education decide unanimously in favor of mask choice. So let's go ahead and relive the entire moment since it was such an awesome moment. Let's rewatch the entire minute.
I'm not going to prolong this. If there are no other questions or someone does not want to state their stance and merely vote, they do not have to do that. We have a motion on the table, and I will repeat the motion for clarity since the conversation has gone on approximately 27 minutes. The motion reads that the Board of Education repeal policy 1900, 4900, 5900, 6900, wearing masks and face coverings during the COVID-19 pandemic, effective March 1, 2022, and further move that as of March 1, 2022, masks shall not be required to be worn by individuals on school grounds or at any school-sponsored activities unless otherwise required by law. Any questions on that motion and what you're voting for? All those in favor of that motion? I believe that's a unanimous vote.
And as Wendy said, yes, unanimous vote. Great moment here in New Milford. Really speaks volumes to the politics and the governance here in New Milford. Along with that singular vote, there were also three other motions that took place. One was more of a procedural motion than anything else. And those motions those motions made effective beginning on March 1st, a lifting of the mask mandates and vaccine mandates within New Milford Public Schools for teachers, volunteers, and visitors. So for starting on Tuesday of last week, before we do that too, also over the last weekend, the Fed lifted mask mandates on buses and public transportation effective Monday last week. So by the morning of March 1st, Tuesday of last week, for the first time in 2 years, here in New Milford, we had proper choice in our public schools, and your kids who were never at serious risk from COVID, as all of the data has shown for 2 years, never at serious risk from COVID in the first place, were finally allowed to see each other's faces. And for some, we're finally allowed to see their teachers' faces for the first time, in some cases, ever. Imagine going 2 years without seeing in person your teacher's face. Imagine the damage that having spent 2 years of your life where you're getting the overwhelming majority, if not virtually all of your socialization, not seeing faces. So good on New Milford Board of Education. I'd have to turn my volume down here. I'm a little bit overkill right now. Good on New Milford Board of Education. Fist pumping moment. Best town in the USA. Excellent that it was unanimous in the case of the Board of Education. But we can't forget that this happened. I cannot imagine the long-term damage this has done to a near entire generation of children, especially the very young children. And we can't forget what happened during these 2 weeks, these past 2 years. And we all know why these executive orders effectively were finally lifted. Test science, TM, did not change. Nothing changed about test science. All of the data, all of the research was released years ago when it comes to these masks and their effectiveness, which I can't speak to. Unfortunately, I can't tell the truth here on Facebook and on YouTube. I can't spell out truth here on YouTube and Facebook. There's an editorial guideline, so can't do that here. You guys will have to see this. If you want to see me talk about this, we'll have to do this on Rumble sometime. So let me know if you want me to talk about that, and we'll get to that. We all know the reality on the ground here. The reason all of these things took place now and not a year and a half ago when they should have is because it's 2022, which is a midterm election year, It's the election year for for the for the gubernatorial offices, the 4-year term offices here in Connecticut, and of course all the 2-year term offices here in Connecticut as well. March 1st marks the procedural beginning of the official election processes here in Connecticut, and parents left, right, and center were finally broken down over these past 2 years to a point where it became obvious that forcing kids to never see faces in any social setting was so politically unpalatable, even Democrats wouldn't stand for it. We all know the reality on the ground is that if it was 2020, if it was an odd numbered year and we weren't getting polling data about the matter, then none of this would have changed. Polling data was coming out, and Democrats in Hartford finally realized they're not getting elected in non-communist communities if they don't end the masquerade. I'll have to say it. And I say in Hartford because I don't think Democrats in New Milford are generally radicals. I think that Democrats in New Milford are, generally speaking, moderates. I think the same thing of Republicans, too. I think that me being a libertarian kind of puts me off towards a far end here in New Milford in a certain way. Speaking of which, Republicans in town, there really isn't much of like the cult of Donald Trump here in New Milford, too. So for the left that's going to smear the right wing here, no. This isn't a town of radicals. Generally speaking, the Democrats in town are not the party of AOC. They are not the party of Bernie Sanders, right? These are 90s Democrats, if you will. So this is a point I've made 1,000 times, and I guess I'll have to continue to make it. When I disparage specific Democrats for their actions and for their policies, I'm usually referring to a handful of people within the DTC leadership, which we'll get to tonight, and we'll talk about again later this week. But the point is, I don't think that the reason I have to say in Hartford is because Democrats in Hartford are not Democrats in New Milford. At least I don't think so. The town... Also, it's been going on over the course of the past 2 weeks. The town also decided not to opt out of yet another zoning regulation being imposed by Hartford. Speaking of Hartford, what happened was we needed that there was new zoning regulations that were coming in from Hartford. They were actually zoning ordinance modifications that, in terms of policy, from a policy standpoint, I kind of agreed with them for the most part. But those policy changes should happen here in New Milford. And they should come from here in New Milford, where we have a zoning ordinance process that's in place the way it is for a reason. And it's significantly more arduous, let's say, than simply not even checking a box. Simply having the default position be the change in policy coming from Hartford. It kind of sets something of a dangerous precedent, not a legal precedent, of course, but something of a moral, ethical, something of a philosophical precedent that you're going to abdicate your responsibility to the taxpayers of New Milford, to our lords in Hartford, right? So unfortunately, to opt out of these new provisions, we needed a 2/3 majority in favor we needed a 2/3 majority in favor of the opt-out, right? So you can be in favor of the policy, but the question at hand that night was not the policy. The question at hand that night was the abdication of duly elected responsibility to Hartford, right? And you know how 3 of those people in the room are going to vote, which means that every Republican has to be in attendance at this meeting. They weren't. We didn't get a 2/3 majority, so we've now opted into Hartford's policy. Which again, I'm not necessarily against the policy, but it's a real sign, if you will. It shows people where your mind really is when it comes to how you build your system of governance, when you summarily reject the notion of duty to devolve authority to the lowest common denominator when possible. But speaking, by the way, when it comes to this provision, we're going to have to ram through this because there's a lot to cover tonight. Let me know in the comment section if you guys want me to talk more about this, because I've got video, I've got clips. It's just a really in-depth topic that's kind of esoteric. So let me know in the comment section if you want me to do a special video just for that, or to do a special live stream just for that just for this topic. It happened a few weeks ago, so it's kind of old news. And again, it's a little bit esoteric, but it's extraordinarily rare that there's an explicit opt-out in a piece of policy. Extraordinarily rare. And usually when you see these explicit opt-outs, we're not creating something of, like in criminal law, there are affirmative defenses, right? this isn't an affirmative defense. This is an explicit opt-out, right? It isn't, and it's in criminal law, an affirmative defense is a defense that's listed in the legislation. It is an affirmative defense that X, and then you would what you would do is you would make the claim X, and now the burden of proof falls on you to prove X. I am innocent because X, right? Now I have to prove X. But the minute I prove X, I'm innocent. It's not like that. Imagine if there was a provision in the law that says if you so much as plead X, you are automatically innocent. You wouldn't do that unless you knew the legislation was terrible. And Chris Cosgrove talked about it in that meeting. Again, we can go over all of that. Again, let me know if you want to pull that section out and put together something of a highlight reel. We needed all 6 Republicans to attend. They didn't, and that's the end of the story. The endless grab bag of loot that is the ARPA funds continued to get rolled out. And speaking of endless money, endless piles of money, the budget process has been continuing over the last 2 weeks with the joint budget hearings. And this is something that I think is really important. And I really hope people have been paying attention to this, because this is something that the town council and the town of New Milford has to go through every single year. It's the one thing from a policy and legislation standpoint that you know you're going to run into no matter what. So if you're coming into an election year, let's say in 2021, as part of your platform, you should know how you're going to look at this process, because it's the one and only thing in these elected seats that you know is going to happen in terms of a policy standpoint every single year. And you know the timing of it, and you can absolutely prepare for the thing in terms of procedure, at least before it comes, and to know kind of what to expect, and to basically have questions prepared from the previous year that if you don't get answered during these presentations at the joint budget hearings, you can ask at these joint budget hearings. Now, this is a huge part of why I haven't been back to my show. And we will be going back to the show on a more regular basis. We'll go right back to our every Sunday at 7 time slot starting this and next week, right? And I'll be doing some stuff throughout the course of the week, which we'll get to in later on in the show. But the point is, that's what's been occupying my time. I've been so busy working with that I just haven't had time to return to this show, which is kind of what I really enjoy doing. But this is in all likelihood going to be over $100 million of your money. 2/3 of it roughly winds up going to the Board of Education. This is the thing that's going to affect property taxes in New Milford. This is the thing that's going to effectively inform government for the entire year, the fiscal year at the very least, which is July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. I really hope everybody's paid attention. The town council will deliberate on the budget now that the budget hearings are done tomorrow night at 7. So if you guys want to see what that looks like, here, let's bring this up. So you guys can watch this on the Town of New Milford's Facebook page. We'll also be simulcasting it onto the Town of New Milford's YouTube channel. So all you have to do is the easiest way to find this is to go to youtube.com, type in Town of New Milford, and it'll bring up our channel. And this is the Town of New Milford's channel. If you scroll down, you can see upcoming live streams in the thumbnail. New Milford Town Council Budget Deliberations, March 7th, 2022. Live, Town of New Milford Town Council Budget Deliberations, March 3rd, 2022. So you can click on that, and it brings up the video, and you can expand the description so you can see the description. And we have links built in for the agenda and the meetings, the simulcast on Facebook. So if this is something that they are interested in, I really hope this is something that people pay attention to, because this is where not only the town council isn't just going to be asking questions of the presenters, isn't just going to be hearing these presentations, they're going to be explaining to you, the taxpayer, their thoughts on the matter. That's where you're going to see the town council make, if there's going to be revisions to the mayor's proposed, that's where those revisions are going to happen. This is the final step of line item revision before it goes off to the Board of Finance, who doesn't have line item discretion. And then after the Board of Finance, it goes off to us, the voters, to referendum. There's a public hearing before the Board of Finance has their deliberations. That'll probably happen towards the end of the month. We're talking about having this on a Saturday because I feel like we might potentially have this on a Saturday because it's more likely that people have time on the weekends to do this sort of thing than they will during the week. But I really hope people pay attention to this sort of thing. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, town at the at the E. Paul Martin Room. The town council will be having their deliberations. This is where they'll have, if there's debate to be had over certain items, this is where the town council will have their debates. This is your last opportunity to speak during public comment towards for all intents and purposes, towards a specific line item, because again, the Board of Finance doesn't have line item discretion. The town council is the last estoppel before we get away from line item discretion. So I'll be there tomorrow night, of course, doing the broadcast. Hopefully you guys can make it there. If you can't make it there, then like I said, we'll be broadcasting to the town's Facebook page and the town's YouTube channel. Just showed you how to do that with YouTube. So that's what's to come. That's what has happened. And in the middle of all of this, and a huge part of why I just decided I'm going to do this no matter how late at night I have to stay up, in the middle of all this was an absolute banger of a town council meeting last Monday night. Starting right off the bat, of course, with public comment. And to be clear, so folks know, tonight's going to be a lot of dunking on Republicans, right? I call it like it is. You do what's good and right because it's good and right. Men have a duty as men to do what is good and right because it is good and right. So when the people you elected, you voted for, and you 99.5% of the time agree with, do something you disagree with and you have to call out, you have to call out. So again, tonight is going to be that 0.5% of the time when we're going to be doing a lot of dunking on Republicans. So the night started with the local veterans continuing to demand an apology from Mary Jane Lundgren for her smearing of more than half of New Milford residents last year as Nazis during the election during their mayoral campaign last year. We've beaten this topic to death on this channel. We've shown the documents. We don't really need to cover it. But the point is, the veterans are to this day 1,000% in the right to continue to demand this apology. Now they're now reducing themselves to sending one person to the podium, which I get. Like, it's unnecessary to send more than one person to the podium. They're coming in with a script, which is great because that means that they can be sure that they're going to fit in under 5 minutes. They can be sure that what they've done is actually in order, and they can be sure that they can, in a meaningful manner, get the point across. And again, they're 1,000% right to do this, but they won't get the apology. They just won't get the apology. And the reason they're continuing to demand it is partly because they know they won't get it. It's partly because it is the right thing to do. Again, remember, I just talked about it is a duty of men to do what is good and right because it is good and right. What Mary Jane Lundgren, I'm naming her name because she's the chair of the DTC. She has oversight, at least in some way, on the campaign literature that goes out, the campaign material that goes out over the course of, in this case, 2021, which was just nonstop and endless smearing, both on social media, in video form, and in paper mailers, smearing everyone who was considering voting for Pete Bass. Obviously, it was implicit, but it was obvious. And we've beaten this horse to death. We've talked about it a million times. Of course, veterans, especially, who, again, ostensibly are there to literally fight the wars, in the case of World War II, against the enemies of the United States. And of course, the country isn't just its boundaries, isn't just its geography, it's the ideas that make up the country, which of course Nazism doesn't align with. It's axiomatically, diametrically opposed to those ideas and those ideals, and the core beliefs, customs, values, etc., that make up the character of this country. And again, the folks who are going to be spilling literal blood to defend those ideas, those beliefs, those customs, those mores, of course, they're going to find it disgusting and a smear on their activities and their service to this country when you're going to smear more than half of the town, again, as being full-on Nazis, full-on exterminate the Jews Nazis, as part of campaign literature. And yes, they're 1,000% right to demand Mary Jane Lundgren, as chair of the DTC, apologize for this sort of thing. By the way, if the Republican chair, who at the time was Paul Murphy, if Paul Murphy put out something like that, put out some literature that was not just divisive, that was that utterly slanderous of the proverbial other side, it would be front page news. It would be front page news across the entire country, and Paul Murphy would have to issue and apologize. Now, again, we've beaten this issue to death, so I'm only bringing this up, and I'm only pointing this out because it's going to become relevant real soon. So, briefly, there was and during public comment, there was also some outright falsehoods about glyphosate. It's commonly known as Roundup. Glyphosate is the manufacturer's label for a product I can't pronounce. It's like 30 letters long. And when it comes to this product, I guess I'm the expert in the room, right? I'm the guy that has the licensures, that has held the licensure across a vast multitude of states. I'm the guy that's had to have the commercial operator license here in Connecticut for almost 20 years. And what that means is going to seminars, lectures, field studies, field days, being subjected to endless amounts of sometimes surprise testing, inspections, questioning. I have to read the literature. I have to read the studies. I have to, you're subjected to endless scrutiny from places like the DEP in Connecticut, the DEC in Massachusetts, the DEP in New York, the EPA, the FDA. There's even regulations that wind up coming in from the DOT when it comes to these sort of things. So folks, if you want me to get more into this, what I'll do is I'll just share a few links about. I'm just going to document dump these links into the comments section here, into the comments here. These are just, oh boy, I can't do. Okay, YouTube limits the number of. All right, so this is what you can get. I'm in YouTube right now. I'll get to Facebook comments in just a second. This is a brief you can get from the University of Tennessee. This is a brief you can get from Penn State on glyphosate. This is the entire, and since we're in Connecticut, let's go to UConn, where UConn has an entire study on glyphosate. And we'll do the same thing, and we'll just dump it all at once into Facebook. Veterans watching, thanks, vets. Really appreciate it. So these are all the links you can go to that are just briefs. If you guys want me to, I can go into long detail about the truth about glyphosate. I have the contact information. I have the personal phone numbers of some of these people because I have to. In order to keep up this licensure, I have to. And there was a lot of stuff that was said during public comment at last Monday night's town council meeting about glyphosate that is just utterly false. So what we can do is we can go ahead and since we like to do our homework on this channel, let me go ahead and get up at least the FAQ, right? This is the frequently asked questions from the University of Tennessee. And by the way, I'm not going from Monsanto's own research, internal research, right? These are huge universities and their agricultural departments. So, I mean, if we're going to follow the science, then you're not going to get, if you're going to call it that, better science than what we're getting from these public universities. Frequently asked questions, glyphosate. What is glyphosate? Glyphosate is an herbicide found in commercial and residential products used for weed management, the most well-known being Roundup. It's a non-selective herbicide. It controls weeds by inhibiting a biological process only found in plants. Only found in plants. Does glyphosate increase cancer risk in humans? There are presently this is from the University of Tennessee, their agricultural extension. There are presently no published scientific studies that directly link glyphosate to cancer development in humans. To that end, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, released a report in December 2017 concluding that glyphosate was not carcinogenic to humans. Link, epa.gov. They affirmed this finding in April 2019, a conclusion that is consistent with other regulatory agencies. So not Monsanto themselves, not some private business, regulatory agencies. And we all know what the reality is with these regulatory agencies. They're looking for any excuse to ban. Any excuse to ban. So if they say everything's good in the hood, then it's all good in the hood. A 2015 report from the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as, quote unquote, a probable human carcinogen. Also on that list, so this is the only place that said there's any link whatsoever to this sort of thing. Also on that list are many other items, including red meat, indoor emissions from burning firewood, high temperature frying, late night work shifts. So when you hear things as probable human carcinogen, that means there isn't an actual established correlation. It means that if we're to purely speculate on the thing, it's possible that there might be some link. There is some logical consistency that with the thing having some sort of link to the other thing. Not evidenced, not as part of research, not as part of some formal study, which we'll get into in a second. In addition to these items classified as probable human carcinogens, the IARC listed the following as known human carcinogens. So not probable, these are known. This is the ones that have actually been subjected to formal testing. Processed meat, all alcoholic beverages, sunlight, engine exhaust, outdoor air pollution. Does the UT Extension, University of Tennessee Extension, recommend glyphosate? The UT Extension recommends glyphosate in accordance with federal and state regulations, which are incredibly strict. Let's go to what Penn State has to say about this. Cancer risks associated with glyphosate. Several organizations have evaluated cancer risks associated with glyphosate in recent years. These assessments consider epidemiological, toxicological, and genotoxicity studies. In 2015, the WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer, concluded that, quote unquote, glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. Now, do you see how tepid that statement is? The IARC study aimed to identify hazards that can result in cancer outcomes, but did not consider the risk of exposure to doses that are likely to occur in the environment. Put another way, the IARC asked, can glyphosate cause cancer under any circumstances? Based on this criteria, other probable human carcinogens include red meat, late night work shift, and indoor emissions from burning wood. University of Tennessee, Penn State University. And this is from Connecticut, UConn. This was a study that was released in 2021. So as recent as you can possibly get. Let's just go straight to the abstract. Glyphosate, unpronounceable, like I said, this is why we're using the company name, is the active ingredient. You know what we should do? We should zoom in so you guys can read this easier. Is the active ingredient in Roundup Inc. I don't think it's incorporated that way, but whatever. Commonly known as a weed killer, it's a non-selective herbicide. Glyphosate targets the enzyme, impossible to pronounce, in the Shikimati pathway. Ultimately, glyphosate selectively induces toxicity targeting EPSPS present in plants and selected microorganisms. Therefore, glyphosate is anticipated to be harmless to animals and humans. Our laboratory studies, I can't pronounce that, also known as the fruit fly, and an interest to understand its gut microbiota and immune system. The comparable immune response of the model organism is similar to honeybees, fungi, and humans. Kind of. To understand the effect of glyphosate on host physiology, we measured host survival during exposure to glyphosate, executed a systemic infection, and investigated an analysis of the host microbial community after treatment. So they drowned fruit flies in raw glyphosate. It was a 1-to-1 solution with super saturated sucralose. We discovered that the presence of glyphosate altered fruit flies, microbiome, and affects survival rate. The analysis suggests, and this is how it affected that, the analysis suggests that glyphosate may have previous unknown impacts to animals that encountered it in the environment. The way that this works is through a process that only exists in insects. It stifles a process that does not exist in vertebrate organisms. So that's what that's just an entry into the research on the matter. I'd be happy to go into much greater detail on the matter. Let me know in the comment section if you guys want me to talk about the truth about glyphosate. I have some guests that are genuine experts on the matter, that are genuine, that are doctors, that are actual research doctors on this matter. Glyphosate doesn't, by the way, real quick, we're just going to blow through this so we can get to the meat of tonight's show. Glyphosate doesn't permeate across animal cell membranes at measurable levels, basically at all, especially in vertebrates. It's absorbed into plant cells through chlorophyll reuptake. Animal cells don't have chlorophyll. This is why it doesn't work on root zone applications. If you drown a plant's roots in Roundup, it won't kill the plant. You have to put it on the foliage of the plant. It's why it doesn't kill trees when, let's say you're doing a renovation of a yard, and I do this for a living. If you renovate a yard and just blanket the yard in Roundup to kill the grass that's there in the first place so that you can then till everything and replace that grass. This is why the trees don't get killed by that, because you have to put it on the foliage. That's where the chlorophyll's happening. And by the way, it also breaks down when exposed to just about everything. It breaks down under direct exposure to air. It breaks down when under exposure to high temperatures. This is why you're not supposed to put Roundup down when it's blazing hot out, because it breaks down. It breaks down just over time. It breaks down underwater. That's why you're not supposed to leave your backpack sprayer full of Roundup. Like when you use Roundup, you use it and you're done, and then you got to clean out the tank because it'll form this just like goo inside the tank, because it breaks down very quickly. Like you can almost see it breaking down just when exposed to water. It breaks down almost instantaneously when exposed to even weak acids. By the way, this is another reason it doesn't work in root zone applications, because all plant roots release acetic acid, and acetic acid breaks down glyphosate. We have acid rain, right, here in the Northeast. So rain breaks it down. This is why you're not supposed to put down, this is why it's stupid to put down glyphosate and Roundup anywhere near rain time, because it breaks down underwater, it breaks down under mild acids. And by the way, hydrochloric acid is one of the strongest acids there are, right? Hydrochloric acid is an extremely strong acid. Your stomach acid is hydrochloric acid, and it breaks down like that. Breaks it down almost, it's an extremely strong acid that breaks it down. So not only is it not absorbed into animal cells, across animal cell membranes, right? Because you need the chlorophyll to reuptake it. It breaks down almost instantaneously when it gets drunk, let's say, right? And when it gets on your skin, it's a salt product, so I guess like there might be some abrasiveness because of salt. The reason the EPA and the FDA okayed this product years ago and preferred it to the other products were because of how unbelievably safe glyphosate is with animals. Not just with humans, with animals, especially mammals. There are lots of way more dangerous pesticides out there, and this is why when glyphosate came out and met the FDA's approval and the EPA's approval, virtually everything else on the market that was a non-selective herbicide went goodbye. Remember what I said about these agencies begging for an excuse to ban something? Yeah, this is why glyphosate is absolutely in the chemical weed control world, and in the weed control world in general, is absolutely ubiquitous, because virtually everything else is either controlled or banned, right? Just about. And in terms of things that are way more dangerous in the chemical world, fertilizer is significantly more dangerous than glyphosate. You can drink a cup of glyphosate, just raw concentrated glyphosate. You just drink a cup of that, you're going to get sick. It's going to make you puke it up. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But you'll live through it. You'll probably be fine. It's going to hurt, it's going to burn, and then you're going to be fine. You drink a cup of copper sulfate, which is an algae killer that's in virtually every water fountain in the world, right? If you go to the putt-putt course, if you go mini golfing and you see the water hazards, they're bright blue. The reason the water's bright blue is because it's full of copper sulfate, right? And we all just reach in and grab our ball and don't think anything about it, right? And move on and play and continue the round, right? That's copper sulfate. You do not want to drink a cup of that. Like that's an immediate trip to the emergency room, and not only getting stomach pumped, you're probably getting cut open. That's an unbelievably dangerous pesticide, right? And it's just copper sulfate. That's all it is. Ionized copper, which is a common fungicide that's used in southern plant species, something in like cabbage palms. No, not cabbage palms, more like sago palms and queen palms, right? That is unbelievably dangerous, and the label for that is insane. And yeah, no, you do not want to get this stuff into your eyes. Like if you get this stuff in your eyes, not Roundup, but copper sulfate, especially ionized copper powder. If you get ionized copper powder in your eyes and you don't wash it out instantaneously, and by the way, when I mean instantaneously, if you don't have a proper wash station, seriously, go find a garden hose and just thumb it into your eyeballs, right? Because you're looking at like permanent blindness if you don't get it out of your eyes real quick, right? And again, fertilizer. Urea nitrate is a ubiquitous fertilizer. Even the most organic fertilizers there are out there, if you swallow a cup full of chicken poop fertilizer, the fertilizer that's come from ground up chicken bones and chicken poop, you're going to get real sick. I mean, real sick. The safety of glyphosate is why the EPA and the FDA basically banned all the previous existing non-selective herbicide. Will it make you sick? Yes. In fact, I won't even say yes. Maybe. Right? If you chug the liquid concentrate, yeah, you're probably going to get sick. Reactivity with hydrochloric acid in your stomach tends to make people really nauseous and puke. That's what's happening. The texture is also super gross. It's kind of like oily. It's not like oily in the same way that say like vegetable oil is. It's more like the texture is more along the lines of like motor oil, actually. Yeah, it's super gross. So is the smell. As they say, like 80% of taste is smell. Good luck getting it down if you're going to even try this. Don't do it, by the way. Don't be an idiot. And you're probably just going to instantaneously puke it up. Again, this is the research from the University of Tennessee. I've had to sit through courses and lectures and read research from North Carolina State. We went over what UConn has to say about it. It's not readily absorbed again across digestive membranes. It's broken down long before it gets to that part of the digestive tract in the first place. The lawsuits are absolutely ridiculous. We'll have to cover that in another video because we're getting way too long in the tooth. The lawsuits are the only lawsuits that they've lost are ones that are done with a jury that doesn't understand the civil suit process, that generally speaking, doesn't understand the law on the matter. Every single time that they've lost the suit, they've either won on appeal or have had the decision rendered get reduced by like 99%, right? And these are dubious claims in the first place. The one that everybody knows about, the one guy that everybody knows about, this is what this guy was doing. This guy had oh God, what was it? It was a lymphoma of some sort. This guy had cancer non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This guy had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? And what he was doing for 20 years was sticking his ungloved arms into this giant vat. He was a rancher. He had this giant vat that he was using to mix glyphosate in water, sticking his whole arms into these. And that's what he was using to stir the process, to agitate to begin the initial agitation for like 20 years. That's what this guy was doing. And his claim was that what he was doing increased the severity of his already existing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's the lawsuit everybody knows about. That's the lawsuit. And again, we'll have to save this for another video. We can go into that in more detail if you want to. The fun part of the night began later in public comment when Joe Quaranta, and I'm only going to say his last name once because it's a mouthful, Joe Q, was asked by Mayor Bass to speak to a $150,000 request out of this endless grad bag of loot, the ARPA funds for quote-unquote farmland assistance. This is where the train derailed in this meeting. Joe was asked to speak during public comment, and he shouldn't have been. This was the item was on the agenda. His request was on the agenda, and from the looks of things, it looks like he was the one that was making the application, that was making the request. The item was on the agenda. It was the public comment was absolutely not the place for this. Unless Joe wants to volunteer his comments and then whatever. And then he has 5 minutes to address public comment. As far as Joe living in Roxbury is concerned, listen, I see the chat. I totally get it. But our own DPW director lives in Litchfield. And yes, he's our DPW director. So he has a vested interest in New Milford. Just like Joe has a vested interest in the business that he operates here in New Milford. I'm not going to speak to the nature of the business. I'm not going to speak to the reality of the business, but he has a business here in New Milford. The address he likes to use during public comment is 87 Boardman Road. That's where his business is. The reason that you ask for the address at public comment is so you can link John Anderson to an address so we know which John Anderson it is. Here in New Milford, there are a million Andersons and there are a million Johns. I'm sure there are more than one John Anderson. The whole point is to link one to the other. And who cares if outsiders speak at public comment? If they're going to say something stupid, they have 5 minutes to address the council. And if you want to not listen and write them off, go ahead. There are definitely people where if Kamala Harris came to speak during public comment, I would write her off and tune her out, right? And there may be a good argument for that, but of course, these people are allowed to speak during public comment. It's the public. It doesn't matter where they come from. They are the public. It's a formal public meeting. So Joe spoke at public comment to this request that from what I can tell of things he's making. No, I don't have video. And that's because his public comment was 13 minutes. I'm not a fan of extensions generally, but 13 minutes. Jesus, he was given several extensions and it went on for 13 minutes, right? Learn how to wrap things up. If you're going to if you're going to give him more time than that 15 minutes, if you're going to give him more time during the conversation relating to the agenda item, sorry, if you're going to give him more time during public comment, then give him the more time during the conversation relating to the agenda item, which isn't a motion or an action. It's just discussion. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. But it's, again, as far as I can tell, the request is made by Joe himself. The request was to establish a committee with a town council member and a farmland preservation member of the Farmland Preservation Commission. And you dole out, and that committee doles out the money to farmers in New Milford doing farm stuff, right? And after 13 minutes during public comment, the S hit the fan. Joe Q was given endless opportunities to wrap it up. And finally, Joe Fiella stepped in and said enough. And then Lisa Agee from the audience yelled out across the room, "You can't have our money. You don't live here." Here's what that dissent looked like. It's about a minute. Enjoy, folks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You can't have our money.
I can't.
You don't live here. No.
Excuse me.
He's asking for our money.
Ma'am, excuse me. I'm the parliamentarian. There's no public comment unless you're standing there. One more and you can leave.
All right, so anyway,
I'll leave. I'll tell you what, this man's up here fighting for these farmers. That's what they're doing. That's what he's, you know what? Look, that's great. Well, he's fighting for you.
I'm not asking for
Fighting
anything.
for you.
Parliamentarian. Here.
Al, absolutely. If you can't respectfully be here,
Okay, let's everybody
Joe.
calm down.
okay, so I'll just end with thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I really hope that you guys will give this some strong consideration. Thank you.
So for the record, Joe, if you're watching and you're asked to wrap it up, that 5 seconds is what wrap it up means, not 8 more minutes. It means you got 5 seconds to wrap it up. And as far as Lisa Agee is concerned, this is wildly out of character for Lisa. Normally it's Rick, right? Who can't keep quiet. Normally it's Lisa who's nudging Rick, going, shut up, right? To Rick. So remember what I said about the vets demanding an apology from Mary Jane Lundgren? Lisa has to apologize. Lisa, I don't know if you're watching, but you have to apologize for that. And you have to do it publicly. You have to do it on the record. You have to do it at the next town council meeting. You have to go to the podium, and you have to do it during public comment. Keep it short. Keep it sweet. Be sincere. Take a quick bow and leave, right? Show Mary Jane what an apology looks like. Show the difference in character. And if Mary Jane ever does the same, and she's not, the vets should stand up, tip their cap silently, and leave. Just like that, right? The vets won't get their apology, but Lisa, if you're watching, you have to bite the bullet. You have to apologize. And again, not tomorrow night at the deliberations, at next week, 8 days from now, at the town council, at the actual next regular town council meeting. And for the record, public comment is the opportunity for the public to address town council, right? This is something that if you guys have been following the Unmasked CT, if you guys have been following the mask situation here in New Milford with the Board of Education, you probably got my letter or email that went out to some of the parents that were considering speaking up during public comment about mask choice at the Board of Education meeting. You're there to address the council. They do not engage with you. This is not a back and forth. You can ask them procedural questions that they'll answer, like, am I allowed to do this during public comment? And if, the parliamentarian will answer that question. But if you're asking them a question, this is your opportunity to talk to them. This is a one-way road for them. They are obliged to listen to you and nothing else, which means that they can't interject really unless you completely fly off the handle, right? They can obviously time, manner, and place. One of those times is that you have 5 minutes. And when you get to 5 minutes, when Sal tells you you've got 1 minute, then hurry up and get that 1 minute done. And when you're done with your minute and Sal says, all right, that's been 5 minutes, wrap it up. Especially if there's people behind you. Especially if you have 20 items on the agenda for the night. There are people there that aren't there, that are volunteering, that aren't being paid by the hour to be there, but maybe are employees of the town and get stuck there, right? So be courteous to the people that are in the room. Remember that the people that are in the room are your neighbors too when you're addressing town council, right? This is a formal, official meeting of a legislative body. This is a formal governmental meeting. So in these formal settings, you're supposed to treat things like they are a formal setting, like it's as formal as a job interview or a or a court appearance, if not in some cases, some ways more so. And this is not where this conversation ends. For those that really despise Joe's character, and there may be reason to do that, you have to give a man enough rope to hang himself. And when the agenda, and later on the agenda item came up, and that means during the discussion part of that agenda item, you have to allow the petitioner to speak. You have to bite the bullet and let him speak. Anyone on town council can call anyone to the podium for questioning about anything, even spuriously linked to the agenda item being discussed. Which means that if Hillary Ram had questions about me, let's say, and where I do the broadcast for the town council meetings, when Pete was presenting the mayor's side of the budget, right, like the expenses in the budget that relate to the mayor's office, if Hillary Ram wanted to grill the mayor and say, well, how much is Mike paying? Mike, come to the podium. I have questions for you. How do you go through all this? Where are your agreements? Where's your insurance certificates? If she wanted to roast me at the podium and ask these questions that relate to that part of the hearing, she's allowed to call me to the podium. Of course, there's no obligation for me to go to the podium, but she's allowed to have me come up there. And if I choose to meet her request and go to the podium, then the town council has an obligation to allow her to be, as a member of town council, to allow her to conduct business. Just like if let's say Katie Francis wanted to call me up and grill me about something. If Katie Francis wants to call me up to the podium and grill me, and I decide to actually agree to go to the podium and get grilled about an agenda item, then she's free to do that. So what you have to do is you have to just let Hillary Ram and Alexander Thomas call Joe Q to the podium and ask their questions. If you don't want anything to do with this, just say nothing. Deal with decision-making when the agenda calls for decision-making, which it didn't. If Joe is going to say something stupid, if you expect this to be utterly ridiculous, you have to get out of his way and let him be the one to do it. Let him be the one to say something stupid. And that's unfortunately the exact opposite of what Republicans did. In law, when you're questioning a witness, you're taught in law school that this is like kind of like one of the defining features of the courtroom setting in a criminal trial proceeding. When it comes to questioning a witness, it's at least as important not to just know what questions to ask and what to say, but know when to stop talking and to know what questions not to ask and to know when you've gotten the W and to just shut up and sit down. Unfortunately, Katie Francis couldn't help herself.
I would like to hear from, as far as determining, not so much the validity of things, but just, are we looking at it as a farmer who farms for a living would be
farmer
looking
who
at
farms
it.
for a living.
Maple Bank, there's Kimberly Farm, as I said, there's Fort Hill with Paul Basaglia. So I think I would just like to have a little more info.
So this is the implied not a real farmer slight. And it may be justified. It may be due. But you can't do it in these formal settings. It may be, in fact, it may be 100% true that Joe is this implied not a real farmer, that he doesn't farm for a living. But for the love of God, don't say it. Again, this is a formal meeting. This is not helping the case. And it's just on principle not appropriate to be saying these things in these settings, especially for comment. Katie, unfortunately, also, just a few minutes later, double down on this.
So I think that's what we need. I don't think we would do, no offense to what you said, Joe, but I think when we're talking about anything, we like to have as much information as possible, and I think talking to people who are farming for a livelihood, there's an important information that we could get.
Farming for livelihood, right? Like, what is the implication here? What's the obvious implication here? Listen, guys, I saw the live comments on Facebook. A lot of them I agree with it. Like, I'm on board with this. But you say them within the informal setting of Facebook commentary. You say them on the internet. The one place specifically designed for these type of comments. You don't say them in a formal official meeting. You don't say them in these type of formal settings. Even if you have good reason to disparage someone's character, you don't do it in a formal setting, period. And this is not just optics. This isn't me just saying like it'd be better strategy for Republicans to win, to succeed moving forward. No. This is on principle. You don't do this. Katie Francis wasn't the only one. Chris Cosgrove couldn't help himself. And God forbid I have to agree with Hillary Ram on this one. Here we go, Chris.
I
I'm
promise.
sorry, are
Excuse
we
me.
back in public comments again?
Well, actually, no, there's a presentation of one of the items on our discussion list.
Is
Go
that
ahead,
acceptable to you, Chris? That I speak to my application?
I weren't aware you were on the agenda.
I think I am on the agenda, right? Mayor?
So could we ask Mr. Kleppen, who gave us this letter, he's the chairman of Farmland Preservation, to come to the next meeting?
Yes, I would like to.
Talk a little
Well,
bit
sure,
about
but
it.
we have Joe here, so let's ask any questions we have of him and whatever he wants to present
Oh,
to us, and then we can
Yes,
invite
I
other
I
people.
think, Joe, that
She's right, you know. I would have some, and for the record, I would have some fairly pointed questions for Joe myself. For example, Joe, what's your role in assembling this request? And that's the first question. And second question, if approved, what do you see as your role in the thing moving forward? And then I'm going to shut the hell up. Because guess what? The way he answers those two questions is going to answer all the questions I have on the matter. Right? He's either going to give the good answer or he's going to give the bad answer. But he has to be the one to give either the good or the bad answer. I have to set him up, if that's the case, to ask to give the bad answer. And if he gives the bad answer, I don't have to say anything. He's the one that gave the bad answer. And if he gives a good answer, then what's the objection here? He gives a good answer, right? So I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to reveal my hand. This is just discussion. This isn't the place where I'm going to be deciding things. Katie Francis, unfortunately, continues on another line of hearing what Joe Q has to say and not what he says other people say. So she's basically saying, Joe, my objection now is I want to hear what you have to say. I don't want to hear hearsay, right? And it's true, but it's not helping. You got the Republicans in that meeting just took a huge L on this one. And at this point, you got to just stop the bleeding. Like after Hillary Ram, God forbid, is actually right on this one, you got to just know that you've taken the L, stop the bleeding, shut the hell up, and move on. This conversation isn't going to get better the more you talk about it. And unfortunately, Katie spent the next 4 minutes just straight up condescending to him. And again, maybe he has it coming, not in a town council meeting, especially when the item is just discussion. Let him make incorrect statements. Correct them at decision time. This isn't just political strategy. Mary Jane Lundgren did eventually make a motion. And when she did, all you have to do is say, we're just getting this now. Look, Mary Jane, we're just getting all of this now. This is a huge request. We don't know what that number is based on. We have a lot of farmers in town. I want to hear from just more of them because we have a lot of them. And hopefully some that we haven't heard from yet because there are a lot of farmers in town. I need more time. I need more info. There are no motions left on the ARPA funds tonight. Every penny not already decided on will be there in 2 weeks. How long did it take me to read that? 15 seconds? And then you stop. And if she makes her motion, then you've made your case and you vote against it. If I don't know, the motion didn't get seconded, so there was no discussion to be had and there's no votes to be had. And honestly, the response that I just gave, I mean, it started off like that.
I would like to make a motion that we set money aside for this right now, because if we don't, it's going to be gone. We've got several other things coming up on the agenda, and the money will be gone. So if we don't set the money aside, it's not going to happen.
Based on what?
Correct, Sal.
Based on what?
But we don't know what to base the amount on, Mary Jane. That's the whole point of wanting to have other people come in.
So stop there. That's it. That's all that had to be said on the matter. Katie Francis, this is good Katie Francis. This is great Katie Francis. Just stop. Conversation's over. If Joe wants to soapbox at the podium, you let him soapbox and then let Joe Fiala at some point step in and say, Joe, all right, the meeting's gone on long enough. This is going to be a 2.5 hour long meeting anyways. We're happy to hear from you. We got to move on. Right? And then you take the W and you move on. But unfortunately, again, Chris Cosgrove and Katie Francis couldn't help. You guys have got to learn when to STFU. If nothing else, this is why these meetings go on for hours. For hours and hours and hours and hours, when an agenda like the one that we had on Monday night should have been done in like an hour and change. And it didn't. It took 2.5 hours, right? I just reviewed the tape. It's 2.5 hours long. This is a point Joe Fiala would make right after Chris Cosgrove and Katie Francis had to open their mouths, which gave Joe the opportunity to own the night. It wasn't a good night for Republicans.
I would like to hear, as Katie said, I agree with you, from people who make a living there, full-time farmers in our town. What they would like to see.
I think we need to air something. I think we need to. But let's just for the sake of clarity's sake here. Everybody keeps saying we got to hear from real farmers, and what I want you guys to understand is for the almost 3 decades now, I've been making a living farming trees. Trees are an agricultural crop in the state of Connecticut. And so regardless if I'm farming corn, tomatoes, or trees, okay, I'm a real farmer, okay? And it just so happens that in the last couple of years I started to farm vegetables to support our community, right? But I don't know why that keeps coming up. But we need to hear from real farmers.
When I say real, Joe, what I mean are people who, that's their living, that's their livelihood.
Right,
And that's what he's gonna say.
But that's my livelihood too, Mrs. Francis, right?
And that's obviously what Joe's going to respond to with that. Like, that's the obvious response to that statement, right? You guys might have legitimate objections to Joe calling himself a farmer, because 99% of what he does at that property is not what most people would look at. And in speaking in common parlance, in the colloquial tongue, most people would not call harvesting trees farming, right? The way he does it, at least anyways, right? There isn't plot of land that he's growing tree on and then harvesting them with a harvester specific to that. No, he's going out to the field and collecting trees. And again, that's not something you're going to eat. It's not making food, right? Like, and his vegetable stand, his vegetable farm, that side of things is like hardly a commercial operation. Like, in the sense of like, we grow enough corn to need a combine, to need harvesting processes specific to this. I totally get it. But this is obviously going to be the response. You can't do this. And by the way, things didn't get better. Katie Francis doubled down on the whole not a real farmer implication, just like she did there. And again, just stop talking. Just stop. Not only will the meetings not be 3 hours long, you won't present the opportunity to say something either dumb or not useful. The more you keep going, the more you keep talking, the more opportunity you give to say something stupid. The more you say, the more words, the more the opportunity there is for stupid. Later on, Sal would say something along the lines of, this isn't a research paper. It wasn't about Joe's proposal. Joe's proposal was not a research paper. I mean, yeah, it's not. But like, so what? Guys, this isn't helpful. On this subject, this was a giant L for Republicans in the room. But, and we're just about at our hour, so we're going to have to wrap things up. But don't worry, folks. We also finally got the numbers in that meeting from Jack Healy about the Chiniski Road Bridge project. Spoiler, it's going to take multiple years, and it's going to be millions of dollars. In a word, boondoggle. And we definitely don't have the time to deal with that tonight. We're going to have to reserve that for that topic for another Chiniski Road Bridge night. Well, maybe we'll do it Wednesday night or something, or Tuesday night or something. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about that. And again, the short version is, if you want to see L's from the proverbial other side, this is the Agincourt of Democrat L's. And it's going to be to the tune of millions of dollars of your money. And by the way, I do have a preview, so let's just run through the numbers real quick. Here's a taste of what we're going to be talking about later this week.
After talking with Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Protection, Energy and Environmental Protection, we've come down to probably right now 4 different options for the bridge. And they depend on what the town council and the town decides as far as grant applications. Number 1, a single lane box culvert. Removal and construction is $940,000. A single lane bridge, that's a poured bridge where you put the forms in and you form the bridge, is $1.43 million. A double lane box culvert is $1,110,000. A double lane poured bridge is $1,660,000. Those prices are best estimates as of today.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that currently, as I talk to different engineering firms, estimates are sometimes being missed by as much as 30% because of the increase in material costs, which are going up very rapidly.
And that, folks, is just the tip of the iceberg. $1.43 million is probably what's going to wind up being the baseline, and then it's going to be add on to that and add on to that, right? And we could have had this done years ago for a few $100,000. It's going to wind up being at least $2 million. Sal points this out later on in the night. Again, we're going to have to reserve this for an entire other night. But the short version is this may be the biggest, insane, and disturbing abuse of your tax dollars at the behest of a handful of obnoxious belligerents this town has seen since the days of King David. And it's probably worse. I've got a hell of a lot to say about this whole thing, which we just don't have time for here tonight. I'm trying to wrap things up. I'm absolutely going to have a separate stream this week and on that one subject. And I'm absolutely going to be submitting a letter to the editor. So stay tuned. I'm going to be backing things up on Odyssey, so you'll be able to see this letter to the editor unedited there. And Hearst Media probably won't have the balls to put into paper what I'm going to actually be writing to them momentarily. I'm going to be finishing up the letter tonight. So again, stay tuned. And if you're a mayor or a councilman watching the stream, check your inboxes this week because you're going to be getting a copy of this. If you ever had a reason to be infuriated by the town council's Democrat minority, this is it. So stay tuned. So we're going to get into Q&A in just a minute here. I notice we got a pretty lively chat going back and forth here tonight. So before we dive into Q&A, if you have questions, if you have comments, happy to answer your questions, happy to get into the comments. Go ahead and leave them now. Again, you always have the opportunity to do this. This is your chance to hold my feet to the fire. Happy to answer your questions, no matter how brutally hard they are. But first, real quick, to let folks know what's happened on some of my other channels and how you guys can follow me, and to talk about briefly what's coming up on some of these other channels. On my Mike Reed's channel, we just wrapped up earlier Tuesday last week. We just wrapped up Ludwig von Mises' The Anti-Capitalist Mentality, and we did a review for that. So this is what that looks like. You can go to my Mike Reed's channel. It's just, again, Mike Reed's YouTube. Go to the channel, and down below, we go to our full reads. I don't know why this is displaying like this, but anyways, yeah, you can go to the full reads, and in the full reads are Ludwig von Mises' The Anti-Capitalist Mentality. It's only 5 reads. Only take a few hours to get through that. If you guys enjoy economics, this is actually a great read. I couldn't think of a more timely and apt and apropos read for 2022 than a book that's explaining the left's. A book from 1952 that was utterly prophetic about the left's cancel culture. He called cancel culture 70 years ago, 1956, excuse me. And I did my review of that. So if you want to see a short version if you want to just to get through to the meat of it and be done in 12 and a half minutes, you can watch that there. So that's what's been happening on my Mike Reed's channel. I have a whole list of things that I'm going to be bringing up on that channel. The real reason I did this read is because it was such a short read, was to get your recommendations in. So if there's something you guys would like me to read on that channel, there's still time to get your recommendations in. Let me know in the comment section of those videos and in the review what it is you'd like me to read next. I'll probably be having an excerpt from Milton Friedman pretty soon. Do check out the channel. We cover a lot of econ on that channel. And speaking of that, we will be talking gas prices and basic economics because apparently it's necessary. Later on this week, we'll be talking about the basics of supply and demand because apparently 50% of the country doesn't understand middle school economics. So guys, do check out that channel. We cover a lot of economics, and again, it's going to be relevant because we're going to be talking about the gas prices later this week. We just don't have time to do it. Later this week, we'll also, this is the big news of the week. Later this week, hopefully have a couple of folks on to talk about the budget. I'm in talks right now with a councilman and a member of the Board of Finance. I'm hoping to invite them both on so we can have a lively back and forth. The town council budget deliberations are tomorrow night. I was hoping to have them on tonight. Scheduling didn't work out, but hopefully we'll be able to have them on later this week so we can pick their brains as we move on with this budget hearing, with the budget process. So we're a little bit over on time, but let's dive into your Q&A. I'm going to start off with YouTube. Joe, why do we have acid rain? As far as I can tell, the reason we have acid rain is because of because of what's gone on in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, in the Great Lakes region, there's sulfur products that are mildly acidic, extremely mildly acidic, that wind up in the air and they come over here. The trade winds take them over to us and it rains down here. It's very mildly acidic. The acidity of the rain is something that you and I would never notice as it's coming down in your skin. You'd never be able to taste the difference if you just went, and, or catching snowflakes on your tongue, catching raindrops on your tongue. You probably wouldn't notice it. Where you might notice it would be like on really old gravestones that are made out of locally quarried calcitic lime. In brief, when you beat it to death, even with really mild, mildly acidic rain, these highly calcitic gravestones might show some damage. They do actually around here show damage as a result of that. They don't see in other parts of the country. Matthew Shearer asks, Rumble, BitChute, DLive, Odyssey. I'm pretty sure you can say what you want on all these platforms without fear of being booted. And I would love to be on those platforms. Unfortunately, you have to ask for permission on Odyssey. I've asked, didn't get it. BitChute has given me non-stop. I don't know if BitChute's actually got a live option, but they've given me non-stop problems, and I can't deal with them anymore. Rumble would be wonderful. I would love to live stream to Rumble. Everything on Rumble is set and ready to go for that, but it costs money. So I would need somebody to sponsor. I would need donations in to help cover that. So folks, again, I've said this before. I'll say it again just because it came up in the comments. If you guys would love if you guys would like to chip into the show, I'll try to find a way to do that. If you guys would like to provide a sponsorship for the show, I'd be happy to plug whatever service or product you have to offer. Joe, isn't the council's job to question motives and clarify issues being presented on the agenda? I'm kind of more on the side of Michael Corleone, who is relating to Fredo, that you never let your hand be shown. And again, this is a formal meeting, right? If you're going to disparage somebody's character, if you're going to clarify issues, then clarify those issues. But that's all you have to do. If you're going to disparage somebody's character in one of these formal settings, which you really shouldn't do, unless it's like extremely due because it was something that was said that was just utterly disgusting, like Mary Jane Lundgren. Write it down and have a formal presentation to present on that matter, right? I might actually be doing that at public comment in the next town council meeting over this Chiniski Road Bridge project. But again, if you're going to go after Joe Q, then you have to be prepared. And just the Republicans clearly weren't. And they clearly went about this the completely wrong way. Joe, was it Marcuse that proposed the idea of thought crimes? Did I just quote a mobster? Yes, but he wasn't wrong. When it comes to negotiations, yes, you do not reveal your hand. And this is true about really anything where you have a back and forth. You kind of don't want to reveal to the proverbial opposition, let's say in the room, what your thoughts are until it's time to do that, right? If you're in a setting where it's the purpose of the setting to reveal that thought process, then you can do that. What I'm saying is that it's just not wise to do that under these circumstances. It would just be wiser to just let Joe Q open mouth, insert his own foot into his mouth. Let's see what Facebook has to say. I bet you Ray's jumping in on this. Ray, hi Mike. Hi Ray. Phyla needs to be reminded that public participation is free speech and mind his P's and Q's. I think that you can control time, manner, and place. So when somebody is yelling across, the room, then no, you can't do that. There's a reason that YouTube has deleted past live town council streams and why nobody at town council said anything about the people that said those things at public comment. So it's the town council can control time, manner, and place. They can't control content for all intents and purposes. So again, somebody who's going to go over the 5-minute time limit into 13 minutes, no, you got to stamp that out. You got to stop that, right? That's a matter of time, not a matter of content. If you can't get it done in 5 minutes, then find another way to do it. Ray, how many real farmers were standing there with their hands out? Hey, Ray, we are on Facebook right now. We're in a really informal setting. So I'll say it because we're in the really informal setting. We're not in the middle of a town council meeting. I'll say it. I think Joe's claim towards being a farmer in the sense that people conceive of being farmers is spurious. I think there's very limited link between what Joe does and what in common parlance people conceive of as farming, right? He had a vegetable farm, right? He had a vegetable, I would say a giant vegetable garden, right? Like when people think of farms, they think of endless fields. They think of fields that like eclipse the horizon line, fields that are so massive you can see the curvature of the earth in them, right? Fields that are fields, right? Not just, what is his stand? About, I think it's like 50 feet by like 250 feet, which is real growth of crops that you can eat. But, at the same time, now that we're on Facebook, I can say these things. I don't think it's appropriate to say these things in town council settings. And you're right. The AGs were not there with their hands out. They were there to say the exact opposite thing. And to be fair, I'm the crazy libertarian in the room. You guys know my thoughts on the ARPA fundings right now. I would have voted no on virtually everything, but that's because I'm a libertarian. And this is just, the ARPA fund's mere existence is just stealing money from Peter, robbing Peter to pay Paul. What this money should go towards is just straight up, as directly as possible, go back into the taxpayers' hands so that they can decide what to do with what is their money, right? And that's why, for me, like I suppose I could see the moratorium, the temporary moratorium on sewer connection fees, right? Because that is a tax that would be applied to really non-discriminating parties. It's kind of picking favorites because you're picking the favorites of whoever the new businesses are, like not the ones that have already paid back that dollar amount. So I might be on board with that. You might be able to convince me with that. I talked about how like what I wanted to have set aside was just straight up send that money, put that money back into the hands of parents so that they can afford to do things like homeschooling their kids, right? Let the money follow the kid, right? That's from a legal standpoint, what should be done, of course, is just you write checks to the taxpayers. How much tax did you pay? What was the relative percentage of the town's tax receipts did you pay? You get that percentage times 7.9 million, just a check, but can't legally do that. So yeah, so I would be the guy in the room that'd be voting against virtually everything. And in this case, I'd probably be voting against this too. But again, I'm doing that on principle. I'm not picking and choosing favorites. When I was a kid, oh, damn you, Facebook. When I was a kid, one requirement to be a farmer was to have a damned farm. Okay. I mean, it's fair, Ray. He's a farmer. If he's a farmer, I'm a effing brain surgeon. Well, Mike, you must be a grass farmer. Yeah, no, I just said, Ray, like I find his claims toward being a farmer as spurious. Like I totally get what you're saying. Like from a legal standpoint, yes, he might qualify as a farmer because he harvests trees. Again, when people say farmer, there is the colloquial version of the word. There is the common parlance version of the word. And when people say farmer, they think food. They think edible agricultural products. They think the things that you would see on Saturday mornings at the farm stands. So no, like Ray, I'm in agreement with you that his claim towards being a farmer is spurious. But you don't say that in a formal setting, right? Especially when it's on an agenda item that is just for discussion. When the decision comes, you may say something along the lines of, the guy that is originating the requests for these funds, the guy that is originating the request for the establishment of these committee, I don't know that he's making these requests in good faith. I don't think that us following these requests and following these statements in good faith is useful, right? And you say that at decision time, not when he's making his presentation. And you don't say it to his face. You say it to the other councilman. You say, I don't know that he's acting in good faith. And I'm basing that on the fact that his claims at being a farmer in the colloquial sense and in common parlance are spurious, right? It may fit a certain legal standard, but it doesn't fit the common parlance. Normal people, most people would not look at Joe Q outside of, again, the like 50 feet by 200 feet that he has, 50 feet. I'm just going off memory, so I could be way off on that. But the section of his business that he has sectioned off for edible vegetation, for vegetable growth, I don't think people would call that a farm. I think they would call that a huge garden, a huge vegetable garden. I don't think that people would look at that and say Joe was a farmer. I also don't think that people would look at his tree harvesting business and say advanced construction makes Joe Q a farmer. I don't think there's anyone who isn't looking at this through the very narrow lens of the world of legality and registered business would call him a farmer. But again, the town council meeting is not the place to do this. To me, this was a big L in parts of the Republicans. And honestly, a garden. Yes, Ray, a big garden. It's not a garden I could fit into my backyard. It's not a garden most people could fit into their backyard, but it's what most people would call a garden. And it's a big one, but most people wouldn't call that a farm. So, I suppose if he were able to produce enough of a single crop in that little area to justify bringing his crop to a farm stand, then he would have a farm stand at the farmer's market. And maybe people would, through that vision, see him as a farmer. But again, guys, I'm on board with that. I just don't think that the town council meeting is the place to be having that conversation. If you open up that can of worms, how many new farmers will pop up? True. So maybe a question not to ask Joe and not to just throw off into the ether. Maybe what you do is behind the scenes, you send an email out to the person who's directing the farmer's market and you say, what qualifiers are you using to offer permission to be part of this event? What qualifiers would you use to say you qualify as a farm to present in the area at the New Milford Farmers Market on Saturday mornings? And you just use his words and you say, listen, this to me seems like a fair and reasonable standard for a colloquial standard for what constitutes a farmer, right? And maybe your opposition to this $150,000 request, again, I'm just spitballing here, so don't hold me to it. But maybe your opposition to the $150,000 request is, like I said, because the man who's originating the request and originating this entire process, your claim is that he's acting in bad faith because if you can't even trust his claim that he is a farmer, then how can you trust his claim that he understands the demands of those farmers when his claim in understanding those demands is that he himself is a farmer? So, like I totally get it. And quite honestly, there are a lot of genuinely good reasons to disparage Joe Q's character. I don't care to do it, right? I kind of like to let the record speak for itself and then vote when it comes time to vote, right? Like I'm a bit of a high roader. Let's see if anyone's let's see if Joe's been grilling me on YouTube. Did you just go, being an arborist is a specific thing? True. In fact, my licensure doesn't apply to arborist settings. Trees, I think it's trees over 25 feet. Yeah, trees over 25 feet, I think it is. My license doesn't apply to. So if I'm just to spray insecticide in these trees, I'm not licensed to do it. Unless it's my personal property, right? If I own the property, I can spray those pesticides, but I can't spray those pesticides in trees because my license doesn't apply to that. It's a specific arboreal license. And there's a specific classification for what I do for trees. And Joe, you're 100% right. And guys, I hope you understand. Like when I said I read your commentary, I read the live stream commentary, and I'm on board with like 90% of it. I mean it, right? Like I'm on board with 90% of it. I just don't think that what Katie Francis and Chris Cosgrove brought up in that meeting, and to a certain extent, Stal, when it comes to Joe Q, was helpful. I don't think it was the right place for it, and I think it's an L. And Lisa, if you're watching, like, I get it. I love what you do. We're on board she and I are on the level with almost virtually everything when it comes to politics. She has to apologize. So Lisa, if you see this, if you're watching, seriously, like, the veterans are going to have to stop what they're doing with Mary Jane Lundgren, just from an optics standpoint, if nothing else. If you don't one up her, if you don't show Mary Jane what good character looks like, and take the L, stop the bleeding, go to the podium, put together 5 sentences. 5 sentences that'll take you 45 seconds, and then go ahead and leave, right? Like, there's no reason for you to expose yourself to the potential backlash from all of that, right? Just I'm here to just offer the apology, and then I'm going to leave and get out of the way. say your piece, move on. I'm not saying get out of the room, right? Like anything like that. I'm just saying it's probably from an optic standpoint better for you to not really be there for that meeting after you issue the apology. Allow the room to breathe. That's all. So anyways, guys, I really appreciate the, here we go. USDA says average size of a small farm is roughly 200 acres. New Milford Center Cemetery is 84 acres. So for folks that have been to New Milford Center Cemetery, imagine 2.5 times the size of that. Yeah. guys, like I'm on board, guys. And the setting for that is right here on Facebook, on YouTube, in social media. I'm happy to say these things. I'm happy to say the things that you can't really say in the formal setting of a town council meeting. And I'm happy to say them in a way that is informal because we're in an informal setting. But you can't do that at a town council meeting. Okay. Ray, if you open that, okay, sorry, I already read that. Do you remember he tried to shut down the farmer's market? Pat, like, again, I'm on board with all of this. Like, I understand what's going on behind the scenes. I was kicked out of this group too, guys, right? Like, I just don't think that going after character in the case of, in a formal setting of an official legislative meeting, you don't do that. You just don't do it there. You do it here. You do it here on Mike's show, where Mike is a free speech absolutist. And whatever you guys say in the chat gets up into the chat. Nothing gets deleted. Not here on Mike's show. Not here on the Mike Sennello show. We delete nothing. We double down on everything. We delete nothing. Free speech is something that I'm an absolutist on, right? And there's some things that are out of my control. If you're dropping F-bombs, say in the chat of a town council meeting, and I'm the one that's supposed to be ostensibly moderating the chat, like reel it in. But again, if you guys are going to say the things that you guys said at that town council meeting in the chat that wasn't F-bombs, right? Okay. All right. It stays up. It stays up until somebody tells me I have to take it down. And I put out a request in the chat. Listen, guys, just here's the bar, but below which, if we go over this bar, Facebook kills the stream midstream. And like, I'm a contractor. I'm a vendor for the town. So I would like to not have us go above whatever that bar is that causes us to kill the stream midstream. Not from my end, but when Zuckerberg chimes in and says, oh, you use the big H word, hydroxy word. You use the big, you talked about vitamin I, goodbye. So I'm not telling you can't do it. I'm not going to delete the comments, but I'm just saying, listen, I would really like to not lose that stream. And if saying things in the comment section makes us lose that stream, we lose the stream. I would prefer not to. So, I would informally request people stay like right here. And if you go over, you go over, right? Like the only time I'm going to complain is if people start dropping like F-bombs and slurs and stuff. Don't be doing that in the chat. Let's have some class. This is the best town in the USA, and let's show. And with all that out of the way, again, guys, thanks so much for staying through with all of this. Love the engagement. Love to have the chat with everybody. We will be back on probably Tuesday night. If the two people that I'm trying to get arranged are watching, guys, please try to reach out to each other and let's get this out. Again, we went through all the stuff that we're going to be talking about on this channel and on my other channels. A lot's coming out. So stay tuned for all that. And again, genuine and sincere thanks to everyone who's watched tonight and moving forward. F-bomb isn't a clause in freedom of speech. No, the freedom of speech, Ray, doesn't come from a document. It doesn't. Freedoms don't come from documents. Rights don't come from documents. Rights pre-exist the documents. So I'm never going to appeal to the Constitution when it comes to freedom of speech. That's why I'm a free speech absolutist. If the Constitution was torn up, you would still have freedom of speech. If you lived in communist Russia, that right would still exist, even if the state was going out of its way to destroy it in practice. I would still stand behind the right. So even I don't care what the Constitution says about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is something you just have. It's a right, and it doesn't come from those protections that are spelled out in the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. It pre-exists them. I'm appealing to something higher than that, right? It comes from the ether, if you want to say it. It comes from the fact that we are human beings, and a violation of freedom of speech is a violation of freedom of speech regardless of what's in the document. So, no, I wouldn't make an appeal to, isn't a clause in freedom of speech. I wouldn't make an appeal to any clause, if you will. But anyways, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back next week. We'll be back throughout the course of the week, so stay